Hello, Ron. How's it going today?
Great. Good morning, Chris. How you doing?
Great. I'm so excited to dig in again with you on auction platforms. This one's going to be very tactical for folks. This is talking today about steps to migrate to a new auction platform. And we're not just talking about the kind of myopic portion where you're migrating to the new platform. We're also kind of looking at some of the roots of your data and kind of some of the steps to set up and get ready for that migration, and then pull the existing data if you want. And in most cases, you probably will, so that you have a really seamless transition from your existing system and infrastructure to the new system and infrastructure. So the business can continue to operate seamlessly. And ideally, the users have an improvement to their experience, but no regression.
Yeah. So it's really exciting because today's the final chapter. Everything we've gone up to now is really talked about making sure you get the right platform. So we really dove into the features and the functionality. And so today we're really going to talk about the development team and how complex these migrations can be. So we want to make sure when you're looking at the teams that we're talking about really you have to really understand what we're talking about. Since we do a lot of e-commerce and have for the last 16 years, I mean, one of the things when we migrate that data, they usually work with me a lot up front where we're doing data, right? Since I'm kind of over the SEO, we're talking about making sure to have the right data for the SEO. So I kind of get involved with them and help them build their import file. And I did a big on our channel. If you want, go into the e-commerce playlist. There's about a 15-minute video that talks about getting your product data ready for importing into an e-com platform. I can't even imagine how much more complex the data structure, the schema, the foreign keys, and the relationships of the data for an auction are than a product on e-commerce. I mean, for the most part, most of our e-commerce, I mean, we've had some of our manufacturing e-commerce clients whose products might have 100 attributes, but for the most part, most products, have an inventory count, description, long description, a few images, and then a handful of attributes. But the auction stuff, especially if you're doing with real estate and some of those others, there could be literally hundreds or thousands of pieces of information about each auction. So I'm going to really have to rely on you today, Chris, as the resident rocket scientist, to dive into the complexities of the data and how important it is to have a team that has the architectural prowess that can sift through that and somehow make sense of that and migrate it into a new platform so it's all in the right place, right?
That's right. And this is really one of the things that I think that we see because we work with a lot of businesses that are already successful. They already have some kind of momentum within the business. Now, that's not our exclusive client. Some of our clients are really starting from scratch. And if that's the case, you can really think about this to kind of understand how to position yourself data-wise so that you're in an optimal position for the long term. Kind of keep in mind that we're going to be talking about some nuances that are specific to clients that we've worked with who end up having a lot of data aggregated over many years in many cases, and some of the experiences from dealing with the different data structures. And fundamentally, the way that I would say this, just to kind of use a comparison, like think about moving all of your pictures or all of your music or maybe all of your files. Like think of all of the files that you may have saved over the years. How did you organize those originally? And how detailed was that organization? Well, depending on your different vendors that, the vendor who you selected and the platform that you're using right now for your auction system, they set something up and it may be very well done. It may be really, really bad. And
Right.
either way, it's incumbent on your future partner and you as the business owner and just the overall auction business. It's incumbent on all of us to make sure that there's a seamless process for the end users. We don't want them to have a regression in their experience. So one of the big things that we want to point out here is that there are different technology stacks. So this could be, Microsoft, .NET. This can be Java. It could be PHP based, Ruby, Python, I mean, the list goes on of all the different languages on the back end. And then similarly with the database side of things, the data persistence layer, the data itself could be persisted in a different way with each system. We could have a very complex data model that has no foreign key relationships. We've seen that before, Ron. And that was always fun. And I say that with a lot of sarcasm and tongue in cheek, but literally millions of records with no foreign key constraints. But at the end of the day, you need to work with a partner who can deal with this constructively. One of the things that's really cool about Clarity is we don't just throw our hands up and say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, if you don't have any foreign keys, then we can't work with this data. And kind of the summary here is that the data and the way that it's stored in your current auction platform could be a large spectrum of different kind of outputs. It could be a significant amount of effort, or it could be a relatively small amount of effort, depending on how everything's set up. So one of the first things that you're going to want to do is decide if you want to bring over all of the data, if you want to bring over just a portion of the data. And typically, most of our clients, based on how they're operating their business, we do recommend bringing over most of the data. Now, anything that you can remove from the kind of necessity to migrate, this is certainly going to be beneficial in many cases. A lot of times there's information that it just isn't very valuable. It may not have a lot of credibility to the data, or it just might be old data. So in that scenario, it would be possible to get a archive copy and have a really nice backup that's available, but basically not force that data on the new system and on the users going forward. So this is just to give a few examples. There may be really, really old auctions that you want to archive for record keeping, but maybe you just need to pull the most recent auctions from the last 24 months or 36 months. And that's totally fine. We can do that. And one of the other things that might be necessary is keeping detailed records for the users so that they can access each of the pieces of data. And so one of the things that we've done before in that scenario is we've, like I said, come up with a timeline of what data we're going to pull. Usually 12, 24, or 36 months is a reasonable kind of look back period. But the team will also provide to their customers the ability to request more data. And so they can make a request, and then that can be fulfilled in a manual process because the frequency would be low. If you don't think the frequency would be low, you can even do things like sending out a survey to the existing customers and saying, hey, this is what we're planning on. We're planning on a major upgrade to the site. We're looking for feedback from some of our high frequency users. And we wanted to get your thoughts on how far back is reasonable. And, if it's going to have a big impact on timeline to take things live, what is your opinion? Should we go ahead and just keep it to 24 months or 12 months and just make it a lot easier to go live with this new site? Or should we go all the way back in time, possibly 5, 10, 15 years back with migrating all of the data? I think most of the time what you'll find is that the end customer is going to be pretty, they're going to be pretty dependent on more recent data and not so much on deep historical data. So the other thing that we've seen with kind of the deeper data is this can also be really useful, at least going back 12 to 24 months, 36 months. If the auction platform has a nice way of representing the different bids and kind of the timing of the bids and information about people's interaction with the auctions, this can be used as part of a feedback loop in making sure that we have this kind of, it's almost a form of analytics on the site that can be really, really helpful as basically just kind of a set of data for machine learning or AI training within the application. So you're just going to want to think about, not only getting the full set of data for a time period, but also thinking ahead about things like, do you want historical data to train an AI or to train the machine learning so that it can better perform within the site? Outside of that, I would say, the other big kind of pieces of data that make a lot of sense to bring over are pulling in just overall category, subcategory, being able to bring in associations with auctions to those categories, subcategories, any kind of taxonomy with tags, just overall structure to the application, reviews of buyers and sellers. And frankly, the list goes on, but ultimately being able to pull all of that historical data tends to be really important for the community, and being able to pull it over accurately. So at the end of the day, we do this process in several different ways. Ultimately, the adaptability of your development team that you're working with on your new platform is going to be really important typically. And so they're going to need to be able to work with some of these different systems that they may not be used to, they may not specialize in, and be able to adapt and get the data that they need. So Ron, we work a lot with different APIs, but we'll also, if the APIs aren't available, or they just don't cover every single endpoint that we would need to pull all of the old data, then we'll go directly to the data persistence layer, which is usually a database.
Right.
And so this works really well overall, to be able to access everything and bring all the data over.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, a good point of that is the governance that you have. Do you have an existing governance on an old site that says you'll persist data forever? Well, then that doesn't leave you a lot of options to start archiving stuff off, does it? So you need to think about this also applies to the new governance rules on the new site. Maybe on the new site, you write in a rule to the governance that says we reserve the right to archive off any data or auctions or information older than 36 months. And so now at least going forward, you can do that. And then maybe as Chris's great idea to send out a survey and ask their permission and tell them, hey, we're going to roll out this brand new platform. We have to migrate a lot of the data over. Don't worry, we're going to bring over all of your ratings, all of your reviews, all of your, how many stars you've earned as a seller and as a buyer. We're going to pull that all over. But as far as all the old auctions and historical auctions, we're thinking maybe we'll archive off anything more than 24 or 36 months old. Which would you choose? And then, give them a couple radio buttons. Don't give them carte blanche authority to just dictate everything, because then they'll ask for the moon. But if you go back and say, we're considering these three things, place your vote on what you would do. And maybe it's only 2, 3, and 4 years of data, and you're not even offering for all. And then maybe at the bottom, you put a little star and say, for those that need more historical or longer data than that, our team will offer, at a marginal fee or something like that to go retrieve that data and provide all of it for you. Because really, they've already dealt with taxes. They've already dealt with everything else. They've already got it on their depreciation schedule if it's a capital asset. So they really shouldn't have to come back and get data more than 3 years, 2, 3, 4 years old anyway, right? So let's talk really about the data itself and bringing the data over. So you've kind of talked about the team, and we wanted to heavily articulate, even if you select a team, let's say we'll just use Clarity for right now, since it's us. You select Clarity because you signed up with me, you saw a really cool demo of the Clarity auction platform, and you want to go with us. Okay, well, that's fine and dandy. Of course, Clarity knows the Clarity platform, but does Clarity know the 100 other platforms you may be migrating from? Right? And we probably don't install and support those. However, being data migration specialists, because we've converted and moved clients from every e-com platform in the world and from disparate and proprietary platforms in the world to our e-com platform, we already have that background. So no matter what platform the data is in, we're very comfortable, right? Even when the data, like you said, doesn't have the foreign keys. I mean, when I'm working with clients on their product data, more than 95% I would fall in that dirty data category, right? They have their data. It took them many, many years to get their data, so it's even working in their current e-com platform or their current auction platform, but it got there from 45 different data sources. So now when it's time to pack up and move it to us, they either have those same 45 data sources and it's all disjointed and not normalized, right? That's really the big one. Most of the data is never normalized, but we need to be able to get access to that data, like you said, either through an endpoint API where we can call and extract the data, through some kind of database, so we can go in and run queries and export the data. But it has to be, it's also really dependent on how structured that data, where it is, that helps us pull it over. So we've had a handful, fortunately not a lot, but we've had a handful of clients that have ditched their last platform before they came to us. And then we didn't have access to their old platform, right? You know which one I'm talking about. They were paying 18 grand a month for hosting and they didn't want to pay that. And so we were literally just starting to go look at the data and migrate the data. We hadn't even pulled any data yet, and they turned around and stopped paying, and that client didn't have a backup and they lost all their data. You remember that project? It was bad. So make sure that when you work with the vendor, you persist and maintain whatever relationship you have with your prior platform and or vendor, to give your new vendor time to get access, to get the structure, to read, see what you're doing, fully understand, document, and then back up and get the data out so that they've got the data to be able to move to the new platform before you make any rash decisions, right?
That's right. And gosh, there's so many good points there. I just want to dive into a couple briefly. You were talking about how whenever you are moving from one vendor to another and one platform to another, there's a lot of data that could be unnecessary, essentially. Um, that is a really key takeaway. And it's kind of like moving houses. A lot of times, what I've found whenever I've moved, um, it was really challenging no matter what.
Refreshing.
And there was pretty much, nothing I could do about that. Every time I've moved, I've gotten a bigger place and there's more stuff to move. And that's probably going to be the same thing for your business. And even if you're kind of, focusing on a specific niche and you technically have a smaller focus, there's a lot of work that goes into kind of reducing the clutter and reducing the noise, because you're going to tend toward accumulating data that isn't necessary to operate the business. And this can create an inertia that kind of slows down the performance of the application if we bring too much data over that isn't really helpful. And it can also be mostly just confusing to the users. You really want to be methodical about cleaning your data and keeping it, manicured, if you will. And ultimately, this is a great opportunity to do that. So whenever you're moving from one system to another, it's a great opportunity to just go in and clean things up and not bring certain things over. However, it's possible, depending on your timeline, to just straight up bring everything over. And the kind of one caveat here is that typically the passwords, because of security, there may be other fields like this too, but they're going to be in a one-way hash. And by definition, they're not, we're not going to be able to get those out of the system. So there are ways to kind of work through that if, absolutely necessary, but ultimately it's just best practice when you're moving from one system to another to plan on having the users update their password information anyway. And this can really be couched in a kind of upgrade plus reinforcing our security and enforcing higher security standards. So, we're just, as a best practice, requesting that everyone update their password information. The other thing, Ron, that you hit on, and I really think this was such a great point. A lot of times whenever there is a change from one vendor to another, there can be some depth to the reason for that change. Maybe the existing vendor is working with you in an unprofessional manner. Hopefully that's not the case. Maybe they just don't have the capability. But ultimately, running a business and running an auction site can be emotional, and there are at least some emotional components to it, especially when you're dealing with finances and major investment to, move the data and make upgrades and changes. What we want to say, and I'm just reinforcing what you said, Ron, is the best kind of stance typically is to be very professional with your previous vendor and maintain a professional working relationship, because this will allow your new vendor to really come in and collaborate with them. A lot of times there might be some concern about letting a vendor know that there's a new vendor in town. Um, we really don't operate like that. We're a very open book, but some vendors are genuinely like there's a valid issue with them being willing to attack you if you show signs that you're going to work with a different vendor. And this probably is illegal in most cases, and they could get them in a lot of trouble. And kind of best case scenario for them, it ought to allow you and others to accumulate a lot of negative press about them that gets to other folks. But either way, in the short term, if you're dealing with a vendor who's unprofessional and you feel comfortable, we are very good at working through you to make requests that don't kind of tip your cards and show your hand that you are switching vendors. So you don't necessarily have to present it as we're migrating to a new system. You can always do things like requesting a full data backup and being able to utilize data backups for archiving. Like, hey, we have a data retention policy where we want to go ahead and retain this data, and we need to go ahead and have our own set of data backed up for the data that's pertinent to our customers. Here's what we need, and we need it at this cadence. Maybe it's once a month or once a quarter that you tell them. And occasionally we may need to request it on demand. And so we can work with that too. And that's a nice way to work around those kind of situations, right, Ron?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you can even go in and say, on our annual security audit, we found that we didn't have the disaster recovery backups that we're supposed to have, whatever, lots of reasons. And that's a great point. You touched on the passwords. I'd like you to mention and dive in just for 2 or 3 minutes, if you want, about since we're going to go with new passwords, I think it's a great opportunity to review security top to bottom. Review, are we in the right hardware platform? Do we have the right disaster recovery and backup, like we just said? Are we painting ourselves into a hole where we don't have a backup and now we have to rely on the relationship with the previous vendor and now we're in trouble and now we're trying to figure that out? Do we want to add additional factor authentication? Because there's a lot of different things now when we're talking about mobile and hacking and people stealing phones and replicating phones and things like that. So I wanted you to talk just briefly, because passwords is much more about security than just passwords, right? So this is a great opportunity when you're migrating. Choose an opportunity to say, well, not only am I migrating to a new platform, I'm migrating to a new technology and a new set of higher standards around that security.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of facets there that you pointed out, and I'll dive into those and possibly mention a few more. First of all, multi-factor authentication and being able to deal with the reality that for a system of interest that has a lot of transactions and could, create a kind of target of opportunity, if you will, and just like a really interesting system for hackers to go after. It becomes exponentially more and more important to focus on security. And this is just a reality in the context that we're in nowadays with operating a public facing web property. So two-factor authentication in kind of its classic form tends to be email or text-based verification. A lot of security analysis has kind of gone into recognizing that even that isn't very secure and it's relatively easy to breach. But it's significantly better than only having a password. And then whenever you
Right.
look at passwords, passwords themselves can be breached pretty easily with brute force approaches because we're dealing with human beings that tend to not necessarily use password tools. And so they're trying to remember everything. They're busy. I'm just going to set this account up and then I'm going to I'll make it better later, but they never do. And so it's possible for us to use a breach detection of passwords to look at this password that they're using has been breached or used, or it's been found with their email and that password in a list that is basically a black market list that's been sold. Well, we can subscribe to that list and include it as a auditing mechanism and let the user know, hey, your password that you put in here is reported on this blacklist that we have access to as having been breached. So you need to update your password now to access the system. And then, we can do things like providing a simple two-factor authentication whenever they're accessing basic things like using the site, but a more robust authentication that is, more significant. That could include security questions or an authenticator application whenever they're trying to do something more substantial, like maybe they need to withdraw a large amount of funds. Maybe it's over $100,000 or over $10,000, whatever that kind of threshold might be. We can absolutely set these pieces of infrastructure up. Now, at the end of the day, there is a human factor to this where it's like you're going to have a law of diminishing returns with too much security and too much kind of, diminishing impact on the user experience. And unfortunately, this is kind of the reality. It's like a no-win situation if you go too extreme on the security, and it's a no-win situation if you don't go extreme enough. And it's a constant balancing act that's kind of, you're going to end up finding that you're going to be tweaking it toward more secure constantly over time. And so you want to work with a vendor who's looking at this, who's even considering it and has executed on it at the level of kind of intensity that it will probably get to in your industry within 2 to 3 years. They should have already executed on that when you're engaging them. We can tell you that we've absolutely done this. We work a lot with the government, a lot of government entities. We also work with a lot of HIPAA and medical, and of course, being in the e-commerce space, PCI DSS compliance, among other things. And we kind of run into the fire, whereas a lot of vendors run away from the fire. We really enjoy these type of projects because we've invested the time to really get good at them. So yeah, I think it's a really key area, Ron, and it's really interesting how nowadays even two-factor authentication, which there was kind of this perception 3 or 4 years ago that was a very robust approach, it's constantly getting breached.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on to the next section, the extension of security, and you almost always hear this. And even when I'm talking to our clients, I'm always talking about security and performance, right? That just seems to be the second half of security. The more security, the more data that you have, the more taxing it is on the performance. So from this perspective, I'd like to have you dive kind of into what does performance mean, and go ahead and dive into the architecture and talk about, the search indexer, separate databases, messaging, web heads, load balance, all the kind of typical server hardening stuff that I see you and the infrastructure team specialize on. The next half of this last section we're on is about the SEO, and that's my area of expertise, but the performance is really you. So go ahead and dive into the performance, and what does that mean when I say, I really want my site's performance to be awesome? What the heck does that
that's
even mean?
Great question and great topic. So this is obviously really key for auctions, in particular, whenever we're operating at scale, and it has multiple facets. One of the key facets is what's the architecture, because a lot of systems can perform well under a relatively small load and small concurrent user base. But whenever they have a significant concurrent user base, so think like many people using the system at the same time, aka concurrent, and there are a lot of people using the system, how does it perform, and how easy is it to scale up the resources without having to change big things that are hard to change, like the software itself? And so this is something that we've really constantly refined and constantly made a priority with all of our projects. Fundamentally, one of the best ways to deal with performance is to look at what's needed when, and how can we basically answer the question, how can we optimize this so we're not doing data intensive and CPU intensive requests over and over? How can we not repeat the same thing over and over? So certain requests to the site, to the application, they can be very intensive, but they can many times be duplicated thousands of times during a day, or even within a minute. The same request is happening over and over and over on the server. So what we want to do is take those duplicate requests and similar requests and cache them into a NoSQL database that's just a flat set of data that's easy to index. Usually this is going to be elastic or Elasticsearch or Redis. And these are both great options for NoSQL. Depending on what part of the application we're looking at, we're going to leverage these tools. The other thing that we can do is whenever we're interacting with the application and therefore making calls back to the server infrastructure that's hosting everything, we want to send data back and forth over the wire that's as minimal as necessary. So if we can keep that concise and complete, but concise as possible, then we're going to end up in a situation where we're only sending what we have to. Anything that's a duplicate request is going to be cached really, really well. And then basically all of the requests that require that the server do some processing, we're going to make a use of that that's, a 10x, 100x, or 1000x more than most sites would do. So this is going to give us this kind of exponential scaling capability. And then you also have the concept of architecting the application so it can function across multiple pieces of hosting infrastructure. So we kind of talked about caching the data, making light calls back and forth between the application and the user interface. The other big piece is being able to scale the infrastructure without running into major technical issues. Whenever you're scaling your infrastructure, you have physical devices. And if it's a cloud infrastructure, you have physical kind of sets of resource groups that are virtualized physical, but they're independent sets of resource groups. And this is representative of different physical server hardware that's in a large data center, and it could be in different regions of that hosting infrastructure. So think about it, like you're sending data across these physical boundaries, and the application needs to be able to understand how to persist data where, so that any kind of interaction across different physical domains doesn't have data loss and doesn't have large latency or delays in loading. And this is a lot of fun. I don't know if we're going to have the video of my face in this, but I'm getting excited talking about it. And you really want to work with a vendor who loves these challenges, loves these opportunities to kind of dig in and take it to the extreme, because that passion and that, kind of that love of making the application really perform, that's going to show through whenever you scale and you build it out. And look, most people aren't going to need to start out with a highly scaled application. But what will happen is with your success, you will be presented with that requirement, and you don't want to be surprised down the road. So whether you're ready for that scalability now or 3 to 5 years from now, I couldn't encourage you enough to the audience. And Ron, I'm sure you can kind of elaborate on this. Like even with SEO, now SEO is highly, highly dependent on performance and usability. And these are really key factors with SEO, for example. It's kind of intermingled within everything that you do with a site.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny how often I'm talking to clients that are looking at our platform, and I tell them that the SEO is built in, and they're like, "Really?" And they're surprised. And I'm like, "How could somebody sell you a platform where it's not built in?" I mean, for example, I've got one client right now, they've got over 8,600 chemicals, right? And that's literally all their website is that we built. So we have this thing. And I'm like, well, if those 8,600 pages aren't optimized and are not published as SEO content to Google, then the other 15 pages of about us and contact us that really have no content on them are really all your company is to the world. So the real important thing is to make sure to have a platform that SEO is a first-class citizen is the best way to say it, right? Make sure it's core. Make sure SEO isn't an afterthought. Make sure that there are SEO fields, SEO configuration, SEO landing pages, SEO product sitemaps, category landing pages and sitemaps that are generated by the platform. Click a button, done. You register it with Google, and off you go. I mean, I did this for one of our clients. We launched their new website, and they came back because I had talked to them about SEO originally. They didn't believe in it. And they finally came back and said, how do we increase traffic? And they had, I think it was roughly about 200 visitors a week to their website. And all I did was I went into our platform, I clicked the button that said generate the product sitemap XML, went into Google Webmaster Tools, registered the sitemap, and immediately their traffic jumped to 700 people a week just by registering the 8,600 pages and making them available to Google. That was it. That's all I did. It took me all of about 10 minutes. And I more than tripled their traffic, and then they came back and then said, well, how do we increase that? And then we moved into content and other things. And I'm still working with that client today. And it's a lot of fun, right? So from an SEO perspective, one of the most important things to do, since we're going to migrate data, I think we've all heard the cliche garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think the important thing is to do an SEO audit of the old site. It's really easy for a vendor like Clarity, who has SEO built into their platform natively. It's really easy for us to build you a new platform that has better SEO practice. But then we're going to turn around and go grab all these auctions and all this garbage from the old site, bring it over, and undo all of the good behavior we would have done had it been built originally or had the auctions been uploaded originally in our platform. So one of the things we can do is we can do a very comprehensive SEO audit of the old site. So when you guys make that decision of what data is coming over, we can then audit that data and figure out, do we have to take and manipulate that data midstream so that we can improve the data to the new SEO best practices, right? Like the SEO permalink structure. So it can be, blah, blah, blah.com/auction/ and then in position 3 where Google wants it, we have a really nice lowercase separated by dashes, properly formatted auction title, right? Well, if the old site isn't that way and the new site should be that way for best practices as a heavily weighted meta tag, then we can go in and manipulate that. But if we manipulate that, we lose any value that the old site would have built up. So instead of walking away from all of the SEO potential, or we really don't know what is built up over time, we want to make sure to put the 301 redirects in place, right? So we can have those permanent redirects. So if you flip the auction site over a weekend, anybody who bookmarked or was watching that auction before can still get back to that same auction, even though it's now at a new URL. So we'll want to make sure that the 301s are taken into place. We'll want to make sure that all of the new pages are canonicalized. And we can spend hours on that. And I know we're not going to do that in this video, but I've either put another SEO URL, I think I have. If not, I'll go ahead and do another webinar on SEO specific to e-commerce and auction sites. And we'll put a video together and put it up on the channel. That's a great video. Make sure the canonicalizations are there. Make sure the new perma structure is there. So even if a user doesn't know what SEO is, even just the basic information that they type in, maybe we auto-generate the SEO URL based on concatenating certain information in fields, making it all lowercase, adding in the hyphens, so it becomes a relatively good SEO optimized URL, even though it's not perfect. We want to make sure all the meta tags are properly formatted. Most of your people posting auctions, one, don't know how to write a proper meta tag. So maybe we'll want to make sure that they're auto-populated so that Google has great SERPs. The search engine result page, is really what increases the click-through rate, right? So if one of your auctions shows up on a Google search, somebody looking for a used John Deere tractor, and you've got an auction for a John Deere tractor, you want to show up, but you don't want it to show up on Google with a really poorly formatted result, right? That comes up and goes tractor for sale. That doesn't really help. You want to make sure, it's John Deere, whatever model number, such and such tractor, and it's got all the appropriate information that somebody would read and go, wow, that looks like what I'm really looking for. And they click. That's what improves the click-through rate. So if you have a bad click-through rate on your searches, it's all about the SERP. So improving your SEO page titles and meta descriptions is literally the number 1 and 2 items you need to work on to increase your click-through rate. That doesn't necessarily improve it. It helps to improve the rankings. Those are 2 of the 5 highest rated factors to Google to ensure proper ranking. But the click-through rate is directly tied to those 2 fields. I don't know if you with SEO have ever talked about link building, or if anybody in the audience understands link building. But link building, I like to call this like the HOA vote, right? We're all in a neighborhood, we're in the same HOA, and we're in our neighborhood HOA meeting, and the president stands up and says, "We're going to raise the HOA rates from $50 a month to $500 a month." And you and I are like, "That's crazy." And so you jump up and go, "Guys, I've done this stuff before. Let me do it." And I jump up and go, "I've been president of another HOA before. I can do it." And the room splits in half, and half the people are voting for me and half the people are voting for you. How do you break the tie, right? So now maybe it looks at external links. So what if Ross Perot, since we're here in Texas, walked into the room and said, "Hey, I worked with Chris before. He worked on my campaign. I love Chris." All right, well, you know what happens to most of my votes? They all swing, right? They become swing votes and go to you, and you win the election. That's pretty easy. That is exactly how internal and external linking works. So now if you can start promoting your auctions externally on highly ranked site, those are what I call Ross Perot votes. Those are heavily weighted. However, sometimes those are difficult and expensive to achieve and gain. So what you can do, the easy way, is get those internal votes. How do I swing more of the neighborhood to vote for me instead of you? Well, that's an internal anchor text link. So maybe the way we do that is at the bottom of the page, and I think everybody listening in has been on Amazon before. When you scroll down to the bottom, what do you see? Other people bought stuff like this, other items from this seller. People often buy these two things and bundle with this. Why are they doing that? Because they're actually promoting and linking to other products that are similar on their site from this product page. So now when it goes to one of those other products that are in that list and Google crawls that, Google says, "Oh, here's a John Deere tractor, but I got 75 other pages and auctions, 75 other pieces of content," right? Google sees things as content, not pages, because they could see a PDF, as a video, as a page, as an auction. Those are all just unique pieces of content. I can have numerous pieces of content all linked back to that John Deere tractor. And so if I have other tractors for sale on my site or other auctions from this seller on that same page down the right sidebar, those additional links to those products in that sidebar are actually promoting and voting for those other auctions. So you might think of it as cross-selling, and the sellers might be like, "You're not going to promote anybody else's auctions on my auction page." Okay, then put a right sidebar that says more auctions from this seller and go ahead and link and vote for other auctions, right? There are many ways to get around this to help improve the other auctions by cross-linking without making it an in-your-face upsell or cross-sell opportunity where one of your people selling on your site might think you're sending traffic away from their auction. So the last thing I want to touch base, this last bullet here, I just kind of covered that one, is entice your users to write more content in their description. Give them guidance, give them help toolbars, give them a 3-minute video of how to write a proper description that can drive more traffic. Possibly add a word counter. So if you've got up to 500 words available in a long description or 1,000 words in a long description, put a counter in there. So when they copy and paste their one paragraph of 78 words in there, they can see this nice big box and it says 78 of 1,000 words consumed. And you can tag it in red and go, "Guys, you don't have enough content," because typically they don't know what they don't know. So for them, they might think they've written a perfectly good comment. "Hey, used couch for sale," right? They're used to using something like Craigslist. "Used couch for free. Come get it today or it's gone." That's all they're ever going to write. They put up a picture of it and somebody comes and grabs it, right? Because there's such a low threshold on something free. But a really high paid auction, especially for a high dollar item, if I can't physically hold it, see it, or test drive it, I want lots of pictures, close-up pictures, detailed descriptions. I want a picture of the VIN. I want a picture of the number on the block so I can double check that the motor is actually out of that car. I want a picture of the chassis VIN so that I know the chassis hasn't been replaced. I want a picture inside in the back of the trunk so I know that there's no rust down in the trunk where the water usually sits and gets in, right? You want more information because you're making a decision on something that you can't physically touch and see and or can't potentially do your own third-party audit or inspection like you could a real estate property. So SEO in my book is a heck of a lot more than just SEO. The SEO part of it, the search engine optimization part of it, is driving the traffic to the auction site. The conversion part of it now is ensuring that the proper information, the proper amount of information answers all of the questions for a prospective buyer so that they can make a decision to start bidding on that item, right? So you're really writing for two audiences. And most of your users that are come and write information on their auction are not going to know this. So it's really up to you to ensure the proper guidance, the proper training, the proper video, the proper help tools, the proper on-screen guidance to help ensure that they follow or adhere to best practices. So one, the minimum SEO requirements are met so we can at least rank on Google. And then two, the minimum conversion rate CRO fields are met so that we can drive up that conversion. So let me kind of turn it back over to you to close this out. Is there anything else about CRO or SEO that you wanted to add in?
Well, I think you did a great job. I would say that really covers a lot of the key areas that folks need to be looking for as kind of a minimum. And there's a lot there, but this is really important for most of our clients. Now, if you're not really looking at SEO as a key driver of traffic and performance on your site long term, there may be a valid reason. Most of our clients are. The other thing that I'll say is a lot of our clients have existing rankings for different keywords. They may really own their niche already, or a big part of their niche, and specific keywords and products and things like that rank very highly for them. One of our key goals, and you can hear this passion from Ron, one of our key goals is to make sure that we don't lose anything in addition to making sure that we're gaining ground. So we do typically, we're going to do a keyword ranking of your previous site, kind of the existing site before you go live. And we'll also take a look at all of the index pages and set up 301 redirects and basically just audit forensically what your current performance is and work to make sure that we're not only not regressing, but we're improving on that. Right, Ron?
Yeah. Well, you could make a simple mistake and say, we're going to archive off everything older than a year. And you just got rid of 3/4 of the content that Google used to rank all your pages well.
That's right.
And you chopped yourself off at the knees, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that forensic audit you mentioned is absolute.
Awesome. Well, speaking of forensic audit, it has been amazing getting to work with you on this webinar series. We hope everyone enjoyed it. We certainly look forward to talking with you. If you want to get into the details with us, we offer complimentary discovery, which is a really cool thing. So feel free to reach out to us. Of course, if you like this content, if you would, hit the like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thanks everybody for watching. And thanks, Ron. Bye for now.
Thanks, Chris. Bye for now.